answered. Okay, and so with those announcements out of the way, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today, Maddie Abbott. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Morning. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Maddie Abbott, and I'm the ministry assistant here at the River. I am also getting my Master of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary, where I am a current student. And it's really good to see you all this morning. Over the past few weeks, we've been exploring what it means to navigate faith across difference. How do we engage faithfully with people who are different from us or who hold different beliefs? And a couple of weeks ago, I preached specifically about some of the tricky dynamics that arise when we have conversations across difference. I specifically focused on how the discourse around virtue signaling complicates some of those conversations. This week, however, I'd like to focus on another thing that I hear come up a lot in conversations across difference, and that's the phrase experts say. Experts say is a phrase that I hear pretty constantly. Some of you have seen me preach before, and you know that I often cite experts in my sermons. I read a lot, and I cite all kinds of people in academia or in the world who have developed an area of expertise in order to make whatever point it is that I am trying to make that Sunday. And I'm not alone in doing that. I think a lot of people, when they're having a conversation and they want to make a point, they'll say, well, you know, the experts say. And that's a way of giving their opinion some extra juice. Because if an expert agrees with you, then you've kind of won the argument, right? You're siding with the people who know best, and that makes you right and the other person wrong. For a lot of us, experts have become the final arbiters of what is true. These are the people who have put in the time, they've had the education, they've gone through a process, they've figured out the answer. And so when we hear other people question the experts or push back on experts, we get uncomfortable. We say, why are you doing that? What's your motive? Why are you trying to distort the truth? With everything that's going on in the world right now and in our political situation, I often hear people wish that more people would just listen to the experts. I hear people say things like, we used to be able to agree on what's true, but now we can't even agree on the basics. I'll hear people implore others to trust the science or to stay informed or to do your research, which are different ways of saying there are experts and we should listen to them. Experts tell us what's true. I've definitely thought, felt, and said things like this at various points. After all, I'm in grad school, I'm getting my master's, and some people might even view me as an expert in the Bible or in theology, though I think my professors might dispute that characterization. Lately, however, I've been considering some of the limitations of my own fixation with experts. There are, after all, a lot of situations where experts don't have all the answers. I know many people with chronic illnesses, for example, who have seen the limits of what doctors can do for them. We've put experts in charge of our political system and our economy, and that hasn't always gone very well. And beyond that, our focus on experts is oftentimes about optimizing what's best for ourselves, which can distract us from other important questions, like what's best for our communities or for the environment. So today, in the interest of helping us all engage with people who are different from us, I want to spend some time interrogating our cultural fixation with expertise. What do we miss when we put all of our faith in experts? What do we do when experts fail us? How might we faithfully navigate a world where it's often unclear what is true? And how can reframing how we think about expertise allow us to engage with people who we disagree with? To do all of that, I'm going to explore a Bible story, the story of Jesus calming the storm. And I want to look at what that story has to tell us about the nature of faith and truth in an uncertain world. Today's story comes from the Gospel of Mark, which many biblical scholars believe was the first gospel account to be written. And to understand this story, it's important to understand how the Gospel of Mark is structured. The way that Mark tells the story of Jesus' life is significant. He uses geography to signal to his readers something pretty significant about Jesus' message. I'm going to show you what I mean. Mark doesn't include a birth story for Jesus, so his gospel account really begins in Judea, where Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River. And after his baptism, Jesus enters the wilderness for 40 days where he is tempted by Satan. And that geography and sequence of events would have been significant to Jewish readers at the time of this gospel's writing for a few reasons. First, Judea was an important place for Jewish people. It's where Jerusalem was, it's where the temple was that was the center of Jewish life, and it's where the Pharisees were located. So the Pharisees were Jewish leaders who were known for their adherence to a strict interpretation of Jewish law. And on top of that, Judea is where the Jordan River was. So when Mark says that all of this is happening in Judea, readers at the time would have associated that with Jewish history. But beyond that, the actual events themselves that Mark talks about, first Jesus is baptized, then he goes into the wilderness, those mirror key events in Jewish history. Jesus goes into the water and comes out of it, just like the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. He then enters the wilderness for 40 days, just like the Israelites wandered the wilderness for 40 years. So the number 40 is significant. And all of this is meant to connect Jesus' story to what came before him. And I'm emphasizing that because it's important for understanding everything that happens after in this gospel account. So after Jesus comes out of the wilderness, he travels north to Galilee. And he starts to do his public ministry in Capernaum and other towns that are located along the Sea of Galilee. This is where he starts doing miracle healings and where he starts to build his following. And Galilee is different from Judea. It's still a Jewish region, but it's further away from Jerusalem, which is where the temple is and where the Pharisees are. So it's not considered an especially holy place for Jewish people. It's sort of outside of Jerusalem's sphere of influence. Jewish people in Galilee had a reputation for being a little less observant of some of the Pharisees' rules and teachings. So what does that signal to Mark's readers that is where Jesus is gaining his followers? He's still Jewish, he's proudly claiming that heritage, but it's not the kind of Judaism that the Pharisees are practicing. He has a different interpretation of what it means to keep the Sabbath. He takes a different view of the significance of fasting, and he's associating with people who the Pharisees would not associate with. He's embracing the Galilean lifestyle. And when the Pharisees hear about this person going around Galilee, gaining a following while preaching some things that are not exactly on message, some of them become concerned enough that they actually leave Jerusalem. They travel to Galilee to see what's going on and to put a stop to it. And they have real reason to be concerned because they are living under Roman rule. And the only way that the Romans are going to let the Jewish people freely practice their religion is if the Pharisees keep the Jewish people in line and make sure that they aren't causing a problem for the imperial government. So if Jesus is out here creating chaos, telling people that the rules just don't apply to them, that poses a serious risk to the community. Jesus is arguably putting all of them in danger of being punished by the Roman Empire by bucking the status quo. So the Pharisees feel compelled to put a stop to what Jesus is doing, and you can kind of understand where they're coming from. And that leads to a few different confrontations between Jesus and the Pharisees. The Pharisees start to challenge what he's doing, and Jesus has to defend himself against their critiques. So this entire sequence of events in Galilee highlights Jesus' move away from the Pharisees' brand of Judaism. He's branching out. And it's after a few of these encounters with Pharisees, where he's established that he's doing something different, that Jesus says to his disciples, "Prepare me a boat. I'm going to go on a journey across the Sea of Galilee. I'm going to go to the other side of the sea." Why does he do that? What's across the Sea of Galilee? Across the Sea of Galilee is a region of Gentiles. It's not a Jewish region. So when Jesus asks his disciples to prepare him a boat, what he's really saying to them is, we're going into unknown territory. We're going to people who are not like us and who will probably be hostile to us. If you thought Galilee was a little out there, try Gerasene. That's the region across the sea where they're headed. People in Gerasene wouldn't have cared about any of the disciples' traditions or teachings or rules, and the Gentiles had their own set of ritual practices that some Jewish people found gross or scary. But beyond that, it was dangerous for a group of Jewish people to go into Gentile territory. It was a turbulent time during the Roman Empire with a lot of tension among various groups, and that tension did sometimes lead to violence. So by getting in that boat with Jesus, the disciples were really agreeing to risk their lives. And that's why it's really significant what Jesus does with the disciples right before he gets in this boat. He does 3 things before getting in the boat. First, he takes the disciples up the mountain with him, and he makes it official. He says, "You 12 are my disciples." And that's significant because in the Hebrew Bible, God delivers important messages to people on mountains. Both Moses and Elijah talk to God on the mountain. So when Jesus brings the disciples up the mountain, that's significant. It's showing that he's continuing to claim Jewish tradition. Wherever he goes after this, even if it's Gentile territory, he will always have his heritage, and that heritage will be central to everything that he does. The second thing he does is he redefines what family is. The Pharisees send for Jesus' mother and brothers to come talk to him. They're basically saying, Jesus has lost his mind. You're his family. Can you come and reason with him? Can you get him to stop causing a ruckus? But when his family shows up, Jesus ignores them. He says, "Who are my mother and brothers?" And pointing to the crowd, he goes, "Here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." Can you imagine? My mother and brother would not be having any of that. My brother's here today, so he knows. This is significant because even though he's claiming Jewish tradition and Jewish heritage, he's distancing himself from this idea that faith is about who you're related to by blood. It's not about who you're descended from or who your cousin is. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. He's thinking about family in a new way, more expansively. We're called to love people as family, even if we're not blood related. And that's important because he and the disciples are about to travel to a place where they won't be blood related to anyone. And Jesus is saying, those people could be our family. The third thing he does before setting out in the boat is he tells a few parables about seeds and the people who plant them and how those seeds grow. Now, why would he do that in this moment? Why would he choose right now, before he gets in the boat, to start sharing parables? That's going to become clearer later on. We will come back to that. To understand why he's sharing parables in this critical moment, we need to jump into today's story. So all of that was just lead up. It was context so that you can understand the weight of what's happening in today's story. Today's story happens after Jesus and his disciples get in the boat after they've left Galilee. They're in the middle of the sea on the way to the land of Gentiles when a storm hits. And Mark writes, "On that day when the evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And waking up, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Be silent, be still.' Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, 'Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?' Now, you've probably heard this story told before. And maybe you've heard popular interpretations of this story where the moral is that the silly disciples should have calmed down and had more faith instead of questioning Jesus. And we're like the disciples, and we should stop being silly and have more faith. I don't think that interpretation does justice to this story. Because looking at this story within the broader context of Mark's gospel, the disciples have actually demonstrated an unreasonable level of faith. When Jesus showed up in Galilee and started preaching a heretical message that they knew could put them in danger, they followed him. And when the Pharisees showed up in Galilee and reminded everyone of just how dangerous Jesus' message was, they still followed him. And when Jesus said, "Get me a boat, we're going into hostile territory, you might never see your family again," they still followed him. I'm imagining what they must have been thinking as they sat in that boat in the dark, in the middle of the storm, as Jesus slept. I'm imagining that some of them probably grew up following all of the rules. They did what they were supposed to do. They believed what they were supposed to believe. They practiced their faith exactly as they were taught. And I'm imagining what it must have been like for each of them to begin to question that faith that they grew up with. It probably started with a few questions that they had that the people around them couldn't give great answers to. Maybe they started to look around and see some of the problematic ways that people used their faith to exclude others or to judge people. And maybe that didn't sit right with them. But it wasn't until Jesus came along that they were able to find the language to give voice to their questions and to their doubts. Suddenly, these things that they'd always kind of known deep down weren't great had a name: legalism, hypocrisy, idolatry. I'm imagining what it must have been like to deconstruct the faith that they grew up with, to question everything that they'd been taught, to wonder if they'd been living a lie their whole life. I'm imagining how isolating that must have been, to feel like their family and friends and everyone they knew were all on the same page, but they just couldn't get there. Not anymore. The disciples in this boat are the ones who somehow managed, against all odds, to leave the fundamentalism that they grew up with behind. Maybe that's an experience that you can relate to. Maybe you've deconstructed the faith that you grew up with. And maybe, like the disciples, you know what it feels like to put your faith in something else and to have that something else fail you too. I'm sure for a while there at the beginning with Jesus, the disciples felt the rush of something new. They probably thought to themselves, this is it. Everything makes sense now. All that deconstruction was leading to something. It was leading to this. Now I can follow Jesus and everything will be okay. Sure, I might have to leave my family and friends behind, but it'll be worth it because this is the thing I've been looking for. I can rest now. And so they left everything they knew behind, their family, their friends, their home, and they got in this boat with Jesus knowing that they were risking their lives. But the moment that trouble hit, the moment a storm came threatening to drown all of them, before they even made it to the land of the Gentiles, Jesus was asleep. And you can hear not just the fear, but also the shock in their voices when they ask, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not care?" That's the part that gets them. It's that they were willing to leave everything behind for someone who doesn't even care. I think a lot of people, after they deconstruct their childhood faith, put their faith in experts. Because deconstruction is a really vulnerable process. It's like having the rug pulled out from under you. It's like taking a sledgehammer to the foundation of your worldview. And at the end of that process, we want to figure out, well, what's the new foundation? What am I basing my beliefs on? How do I know what's real? If it's not fundamentalism, then what? And when you're in that vulnerable place, I think the natural thing to reach for is something that feels rock solid. We don't just want any truth. We want the truth. We want the best ideas. We want people who have spent years of their lives honing their craft, engaging in a scientific process, and methodically arriving at an answer. That's the alternative to fundamentalism. If we can't have fundamentalism, we'll have expertise. That's the new foundation. And so we're turning to experts constantly and we're asking them, tell us what's true. We ask doctors, what's going on in my body? And we put our faith in them to fix it. We ask therapists, what's happening in my mind? And we put our faith in them to make us better. We have financial experts, political experts, parenting experts, dating experts, cooking experts, IT experts, fashion experts. We have Bible experts and theology experts. We have management consultants who are experts in everything. Loved my management consultants in the crowd. If there's a question that you have, there's probably an expert for it. And I know that when I have a question about what I should do in a given situation, I'll often Google around for what the experts say to do. Which makes sense. Why wouldn't you ask an expert? Given the choice between any old answer and the best answer, which one are you going to choose? It makes sense that we turn to experts, and experts have done a lot of good in the world. Advances in modern medicine and how we understand mental health have allowed all kinds of people to seek treatment for a range of issues. Experts have helped a lot of people. So then what's the downside of our culture's current obsession with experts? The problem isn't that expertise exists. It's that when expertise becomes everything, when that's the only kind of truth that we respect, when it's the entire foundation of our worldview, we set ourselves up to be like the disciples in that boat. Because what happens when experts fail us? When the doctors just can't figure out what's going on with you, and they don't know what to do, and you have to wake up every day and deal with the pain and the uncertainty and the confusion and the knowledge that it may never get better. When you've been in therapy for years and you still struggle to get out of bed in the morning, when you're still plagued by dark thoughts and the sense that you don't fit in the world and that you may never fit in the world. When the parenting experts contradict each other, leaving you overwhelmed with conflicting advice and still unsure how to raise your child. When the dating experts can't make the right partner suddenly appear. When the financial experts run the economy into the ground. When the political experts can't stop the rise of an authoritarian regime. When the technology experts create forms of artificial intelligence that threaten to upend society as we know it, replacing jobs, spreading misinformation, and even challenging what it means to be human. When the experts can no longer provide the certainty that we crave and the results that we need, what happens then? The part of this story where Jesus calms the storm is almost an afterthought. He wakes up, tells the wind to be silent and still, and then he turns to his disciples and he says, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" It's like he's saying, "What, you wanted me to make the storm go? I can make the storm go." But that's not really the point of this whole thing. Because the storms are going to continue. The disciples are about to enter hostile territory. In the next chapter, they're going to encounter a demon and a herd of pigs. And after that, they're embarking on a road that will eventually lead to Jesus' death. And sometimes Jesus will perform a miracle, and sometimes he won't. He'll expel the demon, but he's not going to stop the authorities from arresting him or from crucifying him. Jesus can do all kinds of things, and sometimes miracles happen, but not always. Fundamentalist religion tells us that if we do certain things, if we behave in the right way, that we will get certain results. If you really have faith, Jesus will calm the storm every time. And sometimes we look at experts that way. We tell ourselves if we follow the best advice from the most knowledgeable people, everything will be okay. We will get to the other side. But we know that that's not always true. And that's not what this story tells us. One of the notable parts of this story is that it puts forward more questions than answers. The disciples ask, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And Jesus doesn't answer them. He rebukes the storm, and then he responds to them with another question. He asks, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And the disciples respond to him with their own question. They ask, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" And the story ends there with a question. No answers. This is not a story about finding certainty. It's a story about the reality of uncertainty. we can't find the rock-solid answers that we're looking for in fundamentalism or in experts. And that's unsettling. What do we do with that uncertainty? Where is our foundation now? To answer that, I want to take a look for a moment at the darker side of expertise. Experts have helped a lot of people and have done a lot of good in the world. But our culture's obsession with expertise has also done quite a bit of harm. I'm thinking about women and people of color whose lived experiences are frequently dismissed by a medical system that says, we know better than you. And I'm thinking about the harm that's led to people being diagnosed with hysteria or other mental illnesses for calling out systemic injustice and being subjected to all kinds of unethical treatment, including lobotomies, as a result of that. Black women especially see much higher maternal mortality rates as a result of expert-focused thinking. Serena Williams had a near-death experience during childbirth where she had to push back on her medical team who didn't believe what she was telling them about her pulmonary embolism. I'm thinking about queer people who have been subjected to conversion therapy because the experts saw queerness as an illness. I'm thinking about eugenics and forced sterilization done in the name of science and human progress. I'm thinking about the environmental devastation that we see as a direct result of our culture's obsession with optimizing every single facet of our lives with consumer products that experts tell us we need in order to be our best selves. I'm thinking about the loneliness epidemic and the mental health crisis, and how that same obsession with optimizing ourselves has led us to hyper-individualized responses to those crises. It's entirely on us to improve ourselves with the help of experts. That's the solution to the mental health crisis, not community or meaningful relationships. Experts have done some good in the world, but there is a darker side to our cultural obsession with expertise. It limits our ability to see broader truth and to value the truths of people whose experiences are not respected by established systems. It narrows our focus to the question of what's best for me. How do I optimize myself? It distracts us from questions about what's good or right for the world. When we treat expertise as the end-all be-all, we're engaging in another form of fundamentalist religion. That obsession with certainty and with optimization gets us to the same place. On the surface, it looks more inclusive, but in reality, that way of thinking is always going to lead to exclusion. Because we can say, well, let's just update our expertise to make it more inclusive. Let's include women and people of color and queer people, problem solved. But then what happens when other people feel excluded or hurt by expertise? What happens when people, women, people of color, queer people, scientists, professors, poor people, people without college degrees, really any people, what happens when they don't agree with what experts say or when they feel harmed by it? What happens when these people disagree with each other? How do we decide what the best truth is? What does it even mean for something to be the best truth? How do we evaluate what's true when we know that our systems for evaluating what truth is have been shown to be exclusive and even oppressive? I think what the darker side of expertise reveals is that we have never been able to agree on what truth is. Not really. Fundamentalist religion told us what the truth was, and we realized that wasn't it. So then experts started to tell us what the truth was, and for some people, that seemed better, for a while at least, but it never really included everyone, and it also doesn't seem to be working. Our cultural obsession with experts has yielded a climate crisis, a political crisis, an economic crisis, and a mental health crisis. So what's the answer? If not fundamentalism or expertise, then what? The story of Jesus calming the storm happens at a crossroads in the Gospel of Mark. The disciples are in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, in between the land of the Jewish people and the land of the Gentiles. And a lot of people think that the storm that happens in this story is meant to foreshadow all of the turbulence that's about to come when the disciples reach the other side. When Jesus says, "Have you still no faith?" I think what he's really saying is that where they're going to need to think about faith in an entirely new way. There's not going to be one rock-solid foundation that they can stand on, one thing that they can do or believe that will get them the optimal result every time. There's not going to be certainty. But what they'll get instead is something better than certainty. They'll get possibility. Because what's on the other side of the sea is a world that is scary. But God is going to reveal to them new people and new ideas and new experiences that they never would have had if they'd stayed in Galilee. And all of that will challenge them. It'll be hard, but it will also transform them. It will change the way that they live in the world and the way that they are able to love people and the way that they're able to love God. On the other side of the sea is a world of possibilities that they could never have imagined if they'd stuck with what is certain. Certainty is comforting, it feels better, and it gets us certain results in the short term. But it limits us from experiencing the full range of what God is showing us. This story is about what happens when we have faith, but what happens when we have faith is not always what we want or expect. That's not how God works. Instead, what happens when we have faith is that we become a little bit more open to seeing what God is doing. Instead of turning towards something that can deliver us certainty, we turn toward the people in front of us who are broken and frustrating and complicated, and we approach them with curiosity. We ask, why has God put you in front of me today? What is God revealing to me through you? And when we do that, the answer that we get isn't going to be polished or optimal or wise. It might not be the thing we want to hear. It might not be something that we want to build our foundation on. But it's what we have right now. And tomorrow, God will reveal something else. And the next day will be something different. And we don't know what it is. It could be great, it could be terrible, but that's the trade-off. Faith means we don't get certainty. We get possibility. And that means that there's all kinds of places where we can find truth. Experts have some truth that is worth considering. So do the people around us. So do the people we've never met and who we're scared of. So does nature and the environment. And so do you, just as you are. Your truth matters too. Before Jesus got in the boat with the disciples, one of the three things he did was he told them some parables. And the disciples were confused by this. They asked him, "Why do you always speak in parables? Why not just say whatever it is that you mean?" Mark writes that when he was alone, those who were around him, along with the 12, asked him about the parables, and he said to them, "To you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but for those outside, everything comes in parables, in order that they may indeed look but not perceive, and may indeed hear but not understand, so that they may not turn again and be forgiven." With many such parables, he spoke the word to them as they were able to hear it. He did not speak to them except in parables, but he explained everything in private to his disciples. I think it's significant that right before Jesus embarks on this journey into unknown places, he talks about the importance of stories. Jesus' followers don't want to be told a story. They want the truth. Just tell me what the teaching is. Tell me what I need to do to make things better. Whatever it is, I'll do it. Just tell me. But Jesus says, no, it's not like that. You get parables. You get stories. That's what I've got. And you won't understand them, and you'll probably fight about what they mean. But maybe something about them will hit you in the right time and in the right place, and you'll be able to hear something that God is saying to you. Maybe there will come a day when one of these stories speaks directly into your life. It'll just make sense to you. And there won't really be a reason. It'll just happen. That's the possibility that comes with faith. The possibility that we'll be able to see a little bit of what God is doing. What does that mean for faithfully navigating conversations across difference? When we let go of our need for certainty, it's a lot easier to accept that we might not be right. Because the entire concept of being the person who's right changes. It's not about having the answer. No one has the one true answer. It's about acknowledging that God is revealing truths to us through the people around us all of the time. Every person has a parable. And if we listen carefully, sometimes we can hear God in those parables. When we let go of the need for certainty and instead see possibility, we can approach the people around us with curiosity. Instead of reaching for an expert and saying, look, see how wrong you are, we can ask, what's your story? What is God revealing to me through you today? What has happened to you in your life that has broken your trust in experts? Who has dismissed your experience? Who's told you that your feelings don't matter? What are you afraid of? What fears keep you clinging to some semblance of certainty wherever you can find it? And when we hear their parables, we can maybe hear a reflection of ourselves, of our own fears and doubts and hurts. And in that moment, we can maybe see a little piece of God reaching for us through the people in front of us. And we can say to them, me too, I've been hurt and dismissed, and my trust has been broken, and I am grasping for something real to hold on to. I just want to know what's true. I'm scared just like you. And I don't have all the answers that will fix everything. No one does. But I will be there with you through this just like God has been with me, and that is better than being alone. If your goal is to make a better world, asking for someone's parable is going to get you so much farther than being right ever will. If we're going to get ourselves out of these crises, we can't afford to embrace another form of fundamentalist religion. If we're going to do things differently, we need to leave certainty behind and face the terror and the hope and the pain and the joy of God's infinite possibility. With that, I'd like to invite the worship team up as I close us out in a word of prayer. Gracious God, we are in the middle of the sea between where we came from and where we're going, and it is not easy. It's turbulent and scary, and we don't know what's on the other side or if we'll even make it there. We're asking you to make your presence known in our lives, that we might see pieces of you in the parables of the people you've put in front of us. As we head into this week, uncertain of what awaits us, fill us with the knowledge of your possibility and the grace to navigate what comes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.